Hey guys, in this video I'm going to show you how we transformed our kitchen floor from this to this. I won't post the full removal of the hardwood floors, but the first step in laying down our tiles was removing the existing hardwood floors. We had an idea where we wanted the transition to begin, so we marked a straight line across, screwed a strip of wood, and used that strip of wood as a guide for my circular saw. Then we ripped straight across the hardwood floor. We used a hammer and several pry bars to knock out all the wood. Yeah, my wife's a trooper. With the floors removed, it was time to tile. So this was by far one of the most challenging parts of this whole project. We spent about 2 hours staging the tiles to decide how we wanted the transition from wood to tile to look. And once we settled on a shape, we placed the spacers between each tile to get a perfect outline for the front row where the tiles meet the wood. After we laid out the pattern using the spacers, we used the Sharpie to trace the outline of the edge over the existing hardwood. I tried my best to maintain 1/8 of an inch from the tile while tracing the line, so it would give me a matching gap between the wood and tile as the grout lines that I'm going to be using between the tiles. For the transition from wood to tile, I'll be using silicone rather than grout. We've got 3 dogs, so please excuse the dog hair. Once I got my marker lines all down, I removed all the tiles and got ready to start cutting into the hardwood. So I was completely ready to freehand this using my Dremel. And when I walked in my garage, I found this tie, which was from Home Depot, one of my previous projects, something left over. But it's perfect. It has some pre-drilled holes that I can screw the bracket down to the hardwood floor on the side I'm going to dispose of course. And now I have a perfectly straight edge to follow my Dremel with. I secure the bracket down with some sheetrock screws. The 2 Dremel blades I used for this project was a flat saw blade, which is a half round blade, and a flush trim blade. Make sure you buy several of these, because as you go through nails, they will dull. It'll be a long day. It's gonna be a long day. Cutting the edge line into the hardwood took me several hours. You really want to take your time with this, because if you over travel on an edge, you're gonna see it in your final product. You're also switching back and forth between the 2 blades depending on what angle you're cutting at. After cutting my first line, I went back with the marker and drew a tab sticking out from all the corners. With the metal strip covering my line, it was really difficult to know where to stop with the saw. This tab now gave me a better stopping point because I could see exactly where that corner ends. If you plan on doing a lot of flooring, invest in some really good knee pads. On the inside corners, I wasn't really too worried about over traveling on the cut because it was part of the wood that was going to get disposed of anyway. After the first cut, I decided to give the whole outline a light pass first, and then I'll go back later and cut the full depth of the wood. Here's what it looked like after the first pass. Then I went back with the Dremel, cut every groove 3/4 of an inch deep so I could go back in with my pry bar and pry all the wood out. If you've ever cut through hardwood floor, you know when you've gone through because you feel a slight pop when you've passed through the first layer of wood and now you're hitting the subfloor. In some areas I failed to go all the way through, so I had to go back with my Dremel and retrim those areas so I could pry it out easily. To get the shape for the hardy board, we laid out a sheet of builder's paper, traced the outline of the wooden edge, and transferred it onto the hardwood. We taped the paper down to the floor using some painter's tape, and then I used a pencil to scribe or outline the edge of the wood border. I'll fast forward through most of this, but I brought the paper to the shop, laid it over the hardy backer board, traced it over with a pencil, and then I used a Dremel, a scribe, and a box cutter to cut it out. And after a little trimming, perfect fit. I continued to cut and lay out boards while my wife started screwing the boards to the subfloor. When laying down cement boards, the boards have designated spots for the screws. We put about 15 screws per sheet of backer board, and it's really important to stick to this because this is what's going to give you the soundest foundation for laying your tile. And after a really good night's rest, it's time to tile. The first few tiles are the hardest and also the most important. This is where any imperfections in your inlay begin to show, and it's really important to get the tiles perfectly positioned, as this is going to be the start of the rest of the pattern for your room. Another thing that made the beginning of this tile job a little bit difficult was the hardwood floor actually sticks up slightly higher than the tile. So in order to achieve a flush surface, we had to add a little bit extra mortar where the tile meets the wood and level everything back down. The thin set we used is Superior Pro Bond. Melissa and I have actually done several tile jobs in our house, so we have a pretty good rhythm, and usually once we get going, I'll start cutting tiles while she lays them. When laying down the tiles, we tried to be as random as possible. If we stayed too conscious of the pattern that we were laying, we ended up not liking the results. To keep the tile colors evenly distributed, we only pulled out one box of each color of the tiles and didn't replenish it until all the tiles were gone. We use two different tools to cut our tiles. For the easy cuts, the straight cuts, we just use a manual cutter. Here I'm centering my line with the center of the tile cutter. And with some light pressure, I scribe and snap. Any tile that required a difficult cut, requiring more than one cut on the same tile, or too close to the edge, I used a wet saw. The wet saw takes a little bit longer, but you get a much more accurate cut, especially when cutting out corners or L shapes. Here's the last section of tiles, and as you can tell, I'm exhausted. Several days working on your knees will really kill you. For the final set of tiles, we followed the same process we used for the beginning. We staged our tiles, traced it out with a marker, cut it out using the Dremel, and a whole lot of patience. Transferred that shape to a hardy board, prepared our thin set, and laid out our final tiles. And just when you're about to celebrate being finished, you remember you have to grout. When laying our tile, we used 1/8 of an inch spacers for our grout lines, and for our grout color, we chose black. Hope you guys enjoyed our video. Subscribe for the next segment of our kitchen reno.